Over the course of my 9-year career, delving into the mysteries of the Great White North, I've made a handful of discoveries that actually gave me goosebumps. In 2016, I thought I correctly deciphered and interpreted a code that I found in an obscure family history, which I believe pointed to a treasure buried on New Brunswick's Grand Manan Island. In 2017, while doing research for my book Legends of the Nahanni Valley, I came across the story of a man who shot an Akani, or Northern Wild Man, in the forgotten letters of a northern frontiersman named Poole Field. In 2018, I located and interviewed Frank Graves, a semi-legendary character whose northern adventures spawned 2 of the legends in my aforementioned book, from whom I acquired footage that was supposed to have been lost. In 2019, I discovered a connection between a TV show from the 1950s and a mysterious map connected with Oak Island, Nova Scotia, the site of Canada's longest-running treasure hunt. In 2021, I observed 3 eerie similarities between old Cree Wendigo stories and traditional Roman Catholic doctrine regarding demonic possession. And in 2023, my friend Bex Coral told me about her family's encounters with a little person in Port Perry, Ontario, a strange detail of which accorded perfectly with old Ontario pixie legends that I came across in a little-known ethnological treatise. I recently got goosebumps again when comparing notes with my friend and fellow researcher Kevin Guhl, author of the 2024 book An Anthology of American Strangeness Volume 1. Kevin, who has a special interest in the legendary Thunderbird photo, supposedly taken in Tombstone, Arizona in the late 1800s, had been poring over the writings of Hiram Kramer, an eccentric resident of the tiny backwoods community of Hammersley Fork, Pennsylvania, who claimed to have owned a copy of the photo before his death in a house fire in 1967. Kramer declared that the wooded hills of northern Pennsylvania sheltered a population of giant predatory birds, which he called Thunderbirds, after the legendary storm spirit common to native traditions across the continent. He attributed a handful of missing persons cases to the predations of these colossal raptors, which he believed were capable of carrying off fully grown men. In an article on his website, thunderbirdphoto.com, Kevin reproduced one of Kramer's statements regarding the predatory behavior of these avian behemoths, writing,
"The Thunderbird seizes its victim by the shoulders, flies to a bare hilltop, where it places its victim on its back, then rips open the belly, begins eating while the victim is alive. Then it pecks a hole in the skull and eats the brains. Then, if it is still hungry, it eats the meat."
Kramer reiterated his belief in the Thunderbird's skull-pecking proclivities to Al Bielek, a protege of cryptozoology godfather Ivan T. Sanderson, who would go on to gain notoriety for his extraordinary claims regarding secret U.S. military tests, like the supposed Philadelphia experiment and Project Montauk. In 1963, 36-year-old Bielek, at Sanderson's request, interviewed an elderly Kramer in his remote cabin in the Pennsylvania hills. Bielek described the experience in a letter to Sanderson, writing,
"Mr. C was very talkative. Says he has seen many Thunderbirds since approximately 1899, his first. He described in detail the disappearance of several local inhabitants over the years, from old men to a young child, a girl of about 4 who was left alone for a few minutes by her sister while berry picking. The girl was not recovered or found. An old junk dealer traveling alone in the fog disappeared from his wagon and was not found. In 1 or 2 instances, the skeletons were found much later, invariably on a high and barren hilltop. They had been consumed, and apparently, from his descriptions, included boring the skull to devour the brain."
The notion of a skull-pecking Thunderbird reminded me of a pair of old legends that I touched on in my 2019 book, Mysteries of Canada Volume 1, regarding a mysterious vale on the southern shores of Lake Huron's Georgian Bay. If you drive 10 minutes west of the sleepy town of Collingwood, Ontario, into the Blue Mountains, you'll come to the Scenic Caves Nature Preserve. This enchanting natural area is dominated by towering cliffs, gloomy caves, and dark fissures that snake away into the rock. Centuries ago, this otherworldly vale marked the territorial boundary between the Huron Indians and the related Petun or Tobacco Nation. Both peoples avoided the place, especially after dark, believing it to be haunted by the spirits of the dead. The gateway to this village of the dead, the natives believed, was a rugged 16-meter-tall limestone spire, best known today as Standing Rock. The Huron called this edifice Ekareni Ondai, literally the rock that stands out. The first written reference to this lithic anomaly appears in the Jesuit Relations of 1636, a report written by French Jesuit missionaries in Canada to their superiors in Rome. In a chapter on Huron beliefs regarding the human soul, Jesuit missionary Father Jean de Brebeuf, who would be famously tortured to death by Iroquois 13 years later, wrote, "The souls which are stronger and more robust have their gathering place, as I have said, toward the west, where each nation has its own village." I asked one day one of our savages where they thought the village of souls was. He answered that it was toward the Tobacco Nation, that is to say, toward the west, 8 leagues from us, and that some persons had seen them as they were going, that they passed near a rock called Ekareni Ondai, which has often been found marked with the paint which they used to smear their faces. Another told me that on the same road, before arriving at the village, one comes to a cabin where lives one named Oskatarek, or Pierce Head, who draws the brains out of the heads of the dead and keeps them. Tuscarora American ethnologist John Napoleon Brinton Hewitt, in an 1895 article on the Iroquoian concept of the soul, postulated on the symbolic significance behind the Oskatarek's brain-sucking operation. Hewitt first reiterated de Brebeuf's observation that the Iroquois believed that a man had 2 souls, one which resides in his bones after death, and another which travels to the village of the dead after the performance of an ossuarial ritual called the Feast of the Dead. When once the idea that the sensitive soul resided in the marrow of the bones, the most enduring part of the human body, became firmly fixed, Hewitt wrote, it was not difficult to follow this with the further doctrine that the brain, encased in by the largest bony structure of the skeleton, was the appointed seat and abiding place of the intelligent soul or spirit. The use of the war club and the battle axe would soon decide for the savage mind that reason and consciousness abide in the brain, since a blow on the head from either arm drove from the unfortunate one all reason and consciousness. Hence it was also believed that the removal of the brains from the head rendered the sensitive or animating soul stupid and implacable, and capable of committing excesses in the way of preying on the living. This view is recognized in the common Iroquoian tradition that on the way to the land of disembodied spirits, there dwells a person called Head Opener, who makes it his business to take the brains from the dead. Some say to eat them, others to keep them. Here, Hewitt seems to be suggesting that the role of Oskatarek was to deprive ghosts of their reasoning, making them dangerous to living humans. 17th century French explorer Pierre Boucher de Grosbois, Sieur de Boucherville, who served as the governor of Trois-Rivières in the 1660s, learned a different interpretation of the head piercer's function from his Huron allies. In his posthumous 1883 book, Canada in the 17th Century, Boucher wrote that the Huron believed in the immortality of the soul, and say that after death, it goes to a beautiful country. That before it can get there, it has to pass a river, where there is one who lays open the heads of all comers and takes out their brains, so that they no longer remember anything. Here, Grosbois seems to be suggesting that the purpose of the head piercer was to eliminate any attachment a ghost might have to its former life, preparing it for eternal residence in the village of the dead. There is another indigenous legend associated with the Scenic Caves Nature Preserve, which, when conjoined with the legend of the head piercer, forms a disturbing parallel with Hiram Kramer's brain-eating Thunderbird of Pennsylvania. In his 1915 book, Ojibwe Myths and Tales, Canadian cavalry officer Colonel George E. Laidlaw, a veteran of both the Northwest Rebellion and the Boer War, included a brief legend told to him by Ojibwe elder Peter York of Lake Simcoe's Rama Reserve. The old people once went to the Blue Mountains near Collingwood a long time ago, York said. At the end, near the bay, a Thunderbird had its nest. It had 2 young birds. They were shaped like geese, but were naked, and were about as high as a man's chest, and were of brownish red or russet color. By and by, they began to grow pin feathers and get big. Then they went away. The old people went over several times to see them, and they first saw them during a thunderstorm. In a 1998 paper for the Batoon Research Institute Bulletin, Canadian archaeologist Charles Garrad identified the legendary Thunderbird nest in the Blue Mountains as a bowl-shaped cavity immediately adjacent to the Standing Rock, described by British-Canadian archaeologist Fred Birch in a 1904 paper as a sort of amphitheater, 40 or 50 feet in diameter. In a 2011 interview, Garad noted that this nest-like depression is filled with egg-shaped rocks. To put it succinctly, an expert on Pennsylvania folklore believed that thunderbirds pecked holes in the skulls of human beings in order to eat their brains, and the Ojibwe claimed that a thunderbird kept its nest in the very same spot where the Petun believed an entity they called the head piercer bored holes in the skulls of the dead in order to eat their brains. Is it possible that a man-eating, skull-pecking thunderbird once lived in the Blue Mountains, and that the Petun legend of the head piercer derived from discoveries of its grisly leavings? Or are the striking parallels between Kramer's assertions and native legends regarding the Scenic Caves Nature Preserve merely coincidental? This is not the only eerie discovery that Kevin and I made while comparing notes. While reading one of Kevin's articles on a mysterious and little-known cryptozoological phenomenon endemic to the United States and British Columbia, I noticed two astonishing parallels to a pair of native legends from BC's interior plateau that I had come across years ago. Astounding similarities, which actually sent a chill down my spine. Kevin describes these incredible connections in a YouTube video he's put together on his channel, American Strangeness, to which I've included a link in the description.